Two men climb a hill in Brazil, carrying raincoats, capsules, and a note telling them to await a signal. Hours later, they're found dead in the darkness, side by side, with lead masks over their eyes. No killer, no clear cause of death, just one of the strangest unsolved mysteries ever recorded.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
August 1966, Niterói, Brazil. On a lonely hill known as Morro do Vintém, two respectable electronics technicians make a final climb into gathering darkness. They're well-dressed, they're prepared for rain, and they're carrying something far more disturbing than ordinary equipment. Homemade masks, cut from lead, a bottle of water, and a note containing precise instructions. Be at the appointed place, take capsules, await the signal, and mask. Days later, their bodies are discovered lying side by side in the brush. There are no obvious wounds, no sign of struggle, and no clear explanation for what happened on that hill. Investigators are left with fragments, missing money, removed watches, bizarre witness accounts, and an autopsy too late to reveal the truth. Some believe the men were chasing contact with something beyond human understanding. Others suspect poison, deception, or murder. But in one of Brazil's most unsettling unsolved cases, the truth disappeared almost as quickly as the men themselves. Tonight we examine the lead masks case, a mystery of death, ritual, and a signal that may never be answered. So make sure you're subscribed here at Weekly Spooky for a new terrifying and true story every Monday, and get ready as we take a trip to Brazil. August 20th, 1966, Niterói, Brazil. Evening is closing over Morro do Vintém, a rough, brushy hill above the city where the ground is uneven, the air is wet, and the last light is draining out of the sky. Somewhere up there, in the weeds and scrub, two men lie, side by side, in their good suits, raincoats still on, as if they came prepared for weather, but not for death. At first, nobody knows they're there. A boy comes up the hill, looking for his kite. Then comes the smell. Rot in the damp air. He finds the bodies and runs for help. Police and firefighters are called, but the terrain is so steep and awkward that reaching the dead is not so simple. By the time the authorities get properly up there, the scene looks less like a murder site and more like the aftermath of some ritual that nobody can understand. The two dead men are Miguel José Viana, 34, and Manoel Pereira de Cruz, 32, electronics technicians from Campos dos Goytaqueses. They are neatly dressed, There are no obvious signs of a beating, no blood, no knife wounds, no bullet holes, no torn ground suggesting a struggle. But over their eyes are homemade masks, cut from lead. Not full helmets, not welding gear, just crude lead eye shields, like something fashioned for a purpose only they understood. Near them are a bottle of water, a packet of wet towels, and a notebook bearing a short, chilling instruction in Portuguese. Be at the appointed place at 4:30. Take capsules at 6:30. After the effect, protect metals. Await the signal. Mask. Protect metals. Await the signal. Mask. It reads less like a suicide note than a checklist, less like panic than preparation, as if whatever happened on that hill had been planned down to the minute, as if they expected a light, a force, a message, maybe even a visitor. And yet, when the authorities began asking the obvious question, what killed them, the case slips through their fingers almost immediately. The bodies are too decomposed, the autopsy comes too late, toxicology is inconclusive, cause of death unknown. Officially, the men are dead. Unofficially, the mystery is just beginning. Miguel José Viana and Manoel Pereira de Cruz were not drifters, cult celebrities, or anonymous dead pulled from the margins of society. They were working men, both married, both known in their communities, both skilled enough with circuitry and radio equipment that when police started digging into their lives, the first picture that emerged was not one of criminality, but obsession. Not the everyday obsession of work, something stranger. According to later reporting and witness accounts, the two men had become involved in what some described as a scientific spiritualism. They tinkered with electronics, read esoteric material, and reportedly pursued experiments meant to contact spirits or other intelligences through a mix of technical know-how and altered states. Their friend, Alcio Gomez, was often mentioned in those accounts, and one story that kept resurfacing was that the trio had previously conducted bizarre experiments that ended in a bright explosion on Atafona Beach. Police questioned Gomez and at one point even detained him, but never found enough evidence to tie him to the deaths. That is one of the things that makes the lead mask's case so sticky. The lives of these men seem to point toward a strange experiment, but the evidence never quite settles into certainty. There are clues, there are patterns, there is atmosphere, but there's almost nothing in the way of hard closures. On the morning of August 17th, 1966, Miguel and Manoel told their families they were leaving to buy electronics materials and a car. That part sounded normal enough. What was not normal was where they were actually headed. Instead of heading toward Sao Paulo, as some relatives believed, the men traveled to Niterói. They arrived around 2:30 in the afternoon, and from there investigators later reconstructed a trail of small, ordinary actions that only looked sinister in hindsight. They stopped at an electronics store where they were known customers. They bought waterproof raincoats. They bought a bottle of mineral water at a bar. The waitress who sold it to them said Miguel seemed nervous and kept checking his watch. It is one of those little details that sticks in the mind because it feels so specific, so human. He was not wandering. He was not lost. He was waiting for a time, waiting for something. Then they headed for Morro do Vintém. Some reports suggest they may have taken or hitched a jeep part the way up. One account says a local watchman saw the pair arrive with 2 unidentified companions in a jeep and then climb the rest of the hill on foot. That detail has never been fully resolved, but if true, it suggests the dead men were not alone for the entire trip. By then, the weather had turned. It was rainy, darkening fast, and by evening the hill would have been a miserable place to linger, unless you had a good reason. But Miguel and Manoel had reasons, or believed they did. Their note laid out a sequence, be it the location, ingest capsules, and after the effect, protect metals. Wait for signal. Mask. It sounds procedural. Not poetry, not madness scribbled in panic. More like someone's field plan. And those lead masks, those strange, iconic pieces of the case are important mostly because of what they weren't. They weren't designed to help them see. They had no eye holes. They were shields, apparently meant to block light or radiation. That tracks with one theory that the men expected some blinding flash during their experiment. It also tracks with later commentary from religious and paranormal interpreters who claimed such masks could be used in occult or visionary rites. But again, the evidence only tells us they wore the masks. It doesn't tell us why. Then there's an element of this story that brings a lot more questions than answers. The money. Reports held that the men left Campos carrying a substantial amount of cash, yet when the bodies were found, only a much smaller amount remained in their pockets. Their watches had also been removed from their wrists and placed in those same pockets. That is either incredibly significant or maddeningly meaningless. Was someone else there? Were valuables taken? Did the men themselves stash or spend money before they died? The case never answered it. What we do know is simple and eerie. At some point after buying raincoats and water, Miguel José Viana and Manoel Pereira de Cruz went up that hill with purpose. They had instructions. They had capsules. They had masks made of lead. They lay down beside one another in the brush, and then, sometime between that wet evening and the discovery of their bodies, whatever they were waiting for arrived. Or something else did. The strongest verified facts in the case are these. The men traveled to Niterói on August 17th, bought the raincoats and water, went to Morro de Vintém, and were later found dead wearing homemade lead eye masks with a note about capsules and a signal. Claims about spiritualist groups, prior experiments, and unidentified companions on the hill appear in later retellings and witness statements, but they've never been a proven official conclusion. When authorities finally examined the scene, what they did not find may have been even stranger than what they did. No obvious signs of violence or evidence of a struggle, no major trauma. The bodies lay close together, partly covered by grass, as though the men had simply laid down and never gotten back up. Nearby were the bottle, the towels, the masks, the note. It was an arrangement so deliberate-looking that even decades later people still talk about the case as if it were a ritual interrupted by death. But investigations do not live on atmosphere. They live on pathology, and pathology failed this case almost from the start. As we mentioned before, the autopsy was delayed. By the time it was carried out, weeks later, according to the commonly cited accounts, the bodies were too decomposed for reliable internal testing. Toxicology for poison was not meaningfully completed. No definitive cause of death could be established. In practical terms, that meant one of the most important questions in the entire mystery was lost almost immediately. If the men took poison, the evidence may have rotted away before anyone looked. If they overdosed by accident, the same problem persists. If they were killed by something subtler than blunt force or bullets, the clock and the climate had already done their damage. That single investigative failure is why the lead masks case remains unsolved, not just in theory, but in structure. The center of the case, the cause of death, is missing. Everything built afterward sits on that hole. So, the theories rushed in. One of the most enduring involves scientific spiritism, the alleged belief system the two men were said to be involved in. Under that theory, Miguel and Manoel were attempting some sort of visionary or spiritual contact aided by capsules, possibly psychedelic or otherwise dangerous, and the lead masks were meant to protect them from an intense light that they expected to accompany the event. Their interest in electronics, their reputed occult experiments, the handmade masks, and the note all fit neatly into that framework. It is strange, but it is at least internally coherent. The problem is that a coherent theory is not the same thing as proof. Another line of speculation pushed the case toward outright homicide. The missing money helped with that. So did the suggestion that a third party may have written or directed the plan. One later figure even claimed years afterward that he and accomplices had robbed and killed the two technicians, forcing them to take poison at gunpoint. It was the kind of confession that should have cracked the case wide open. Instead, it fell apart. Investigators concluded he contradicted himself badly enough that the story could not be trusted, and the claim went nowhere. Then there are the UFO stories. On the night the men likely died, a woman named Gracinda Barboso Cucino de Sosa reported seeing a bright, multicolored object over Morro de Vintém, described as ringed with fiery orange light and emitting blue rays. Other witnesses later came forward with similar stories. That report became gasoline on the fire. Suddenly, the case was not merely about two dead technicians and a failed autopsy. It was about a possible signal from the sky, a rendezvous, a contact event gone wrong, an encounter. It is the most famous version of the lead masks case because it's the most cinematic. Two men climb a hill with homemade shields over their eyes and capsules in their pockets, waiting for a sign from something above them. Then they die where they die. It barely needs any embellishment. But here is the trouble. The UFO sighting does not explain the deaths. It only deepens the mood around them. Even if the sighting happened exactly as described, It still would not tell us whether the men died from poison, overdose, exposure, heart failure, fraud, or murder. It would simply tell us that on the same night, somebody saw something unusual in the sky. That is intriguing, but it's not the same as resolution. Other theories have drifted in and out over the years. Lightning, radiation, secret criminal dealings, occult sacrifice. Some reports even referenced another earlier death of a technician found with a lead mask, suggesting a pattern no one has ever pinned down. But none of it closed the central gap. Nobody could say for certain what it was in the capsules. Nobody could prove who wrote the note. Nobody could say with confidence whether anyone accompanied the men to the hilltop and left before death, or after it. And once a mystery survives its first wave of police work, it changes shape. It stops being just an investigation and becomes a cultural object. Reporters write it one way, ufologists write it another. Skeptics sand away the more supernatural claims and point to botched toxicology, bad record-keeping, and suggestible witnesses. Each retelling chooses what kind of darkness it prefers, yet the original image remains stubbornly intact. Two men in suits, raincoats in the rain, a hill above the city, crude lead masks over the eyes, a note that sounds like instructions for a meeting with something dangerous, and a death so quiet it left almost nothing behind. The autopsy delay is one of the most important facts in the case. Because the bodies were badly decomposed by the time examination happened, reliable toxicology was never completed, and the official cause of death remained undetermined. That means many popular explanations, drug overdose, poison, lightning, radiation, UFO-related injury, or homicide, remained possibilities discussed in later accounts, but not settled findings. In the years after the deaths, the lead masks case did what the best unsolved mysteries always do. It refused to stay small. It spread across newspapers, across paranormal circles, across skeptical essays and TV specials and whispered retellings that stripped away the mundane retails and polished the eerie ones until the story gleamed. By then, Morro do Vintém was no longer just the place where two technicians died. It had become a stage on which Brazil projected every fear it had about science without limits, faith without grounding, and the possibility that human beings might go looking for something extraordinary, only to find death. And if you look at the case long enough, that may be the most terrifying explanation of all. Not aliens, not secret killers, not a bolt from the heavens, just two men who believed they were on the threshold of revelation. Miguel and Manoel were, by all accounts, not fools. They worked with electronics. They built things. They tested ideas. That makes the case more unsettling, not less, because the border between experimentation and obsession can be hard to see from the inside. If they were involved in spiritualist technical experiments, as multiple accounts suggest, then the note reads less like nonsense and more like procedure. Meet at this time, take this substance at this time, use protection, await event. That isn't chaos. It's intent. There is a grim plausibility there. Perhaps they took capsules voluntarily, expecting visions, light, contact, transcendence, whatever word they might have used. Perhaps the dose was wrong. Perhaps the substance was misidentified. Perhaps they trusted instructions that had worked in lesser experiments and failed catastrophically here. In that version of the story, no murderer needs to appear from the brush. The hill does not need a spaceship. It only needs faith, chemicals, and human error. But even that rational theory has loose threads. Why was so much money missing? Who, if anyone, wrote the note? Why were there suggestions that others may have been with them earlier on the hill? Why were there watches in their pockets? Why lead, specifically? Why the phrase, protect metals? If the entire event was self-directed, some pieces feel strangely theatrical, almost as if the men were following a script provided by someone else. And that is how the case keeps pulling people back. Every theory explains one cluster of details and leaves another untouched. Homicide accounts for the missing money, maybe the note, maybe the possible companions, but not the total absence of clear violence. Drug misadventure explains the note and the ritual feeling of the scene, but not the unresolved practical oddities. UFO and occult theories explain the masks emotionally, symbolically, even dramatically, but not medically. Later examinations and later journalists all had the same problem. There was more fascination than evidence. The case had already calcified into legend, and legend is hard to autopsy. So, what's left? A hill in Niterói, a rain-soaked trip cut short, two technicians who seem to be living half in the practical world of circuits and repairs, and half in another world entirely, one of signals, hidden forces, and messages waiting to be received. That's the thing about the lead masks case that really lingers. It's not merely weird. It feels transitional. The men at its center were not priests or prophets. They were modern tradesmen. They came from a world of wires and clocks and bus schedules. Then they climbed a hill with handmade masks and instructions for swallowing capsules before a signal arrived. The whole story feels like a collision between technology and mysticism, between the machine age and the ancient human hunger for revelation. And maybe that is why the image is so hard to shake. Because if they were murdered, then someone took advantage of belief. If they died in a self-staged experiment, then belief itself was enough. Either way, the masks over their eyes became a kind of symbol, a desperate effort to prepare for what they thought was coming. A shield against brightness, against radiation, against vision, against truth. And whatever the men expected to see when the signal came, if it came at all, they never lived to describe it. The official answer remains brutally plain. Cause of death, undetermined. Case unsolved. More than a half a century later, the lead masks case survives because it denies the audience the one comfort true crime usually offers: an ending. No confession that holds, no forensic miracle, no villain unmasked. Just two dead men on a Brazilian hillside, dressed for the weather, equipped for something impossible, and taken by a mystery that outlived both of them. And on some wet night in your mind, if you let the story get too close, you can almost feel it. The climb up the hill, the raincoat sticking to your arms, the taste of mineral water, and whatever waited in those capsules. The crinkle of that note in your pocket, the mask heavy in your hand. 4:30, be at the place. 6:30, take the capsule. After the effect, protect metals, await signal, mask. Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. It's executive produced by Rob Fields and Bobbletopia.com. And produced by Dan Wilder. With original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you think we should cover on Terrifying and True, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us for as little as $1 a month, go to weeklyspooky.com/join. Your support for as little as $1 a month keeps the show going. And speaking of, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay a little bit more to hear their name at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Kate and Lulu, Jessica Fuller, Mike Eschewey, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Karen Wiemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and thank you for listening. We'll see you all right here next time on Terrifying and True.